So Joel, we think of the book of Amos as probably the earliest of the 12 minor prophets, even though it doesn't come first in the canon, in the canonical order. One of the nice things about most of the books in the book of the 12 is that they give us a little superscription that actually tells us a little bit about when the prophet was active. So we learn at the beginning of the book of Amos that these are the words of Amos, who was among the shepherds of Tekoa, which he saw concerning Israel, the northern kingdom, in the days of King Uzziah of Judah and the days of King Jeroboam of Israel, 2 years before the earthquake. What are we supposed to make of that earthquake reference?
Yeah, this is, I think, pretty much the only reference to an earthquake almost, anywhere in the Bible. It's such an obscure little note to open with, but the fact that it's there, I don't know. My suspicion is that Amos prophesied an earthquake that happened, and in a sense, that was like, we read in things in Deuteronomy and other places about like, how do you know you got a real prophet? Well, if he says something's going to happen and it happens, that's how you know. That's the kind of thing that I'm imagining. Is he got lucky, probably.
Right.
This is the only way that happens. But I don't know. To me, there's something really useful about remembering that. We read these prophets in our text and we assume, oh, everybody, these are that was Amos, right? Everyone must have known Amos. It would have famous, the George Clooney of prophets, you know what I mean? But prophets did need something to authenticate their message. Sometimes we know what they are, sometimes we don't. But earthquakes, wars and results of wars, there are or battles, right? All kinds of things that would make these otherwise, guy yelling on a street corner sort of, especially with Amos, right? And I guess that's a good way of transitioning, right? Amos declares himself to not be a prophet. And this very famous, right? I'm not a prophet. I'm not a son of a prophet. And it's, he's like a, right? Isn't he he's like a
the sycamore?
He's like a fig guy.
Yeah.
That's his whole thing. He's an agriculturalist. And so the book of Amos actually gives us a wonderful sort of opening invitation into the question of sort of what is a prophet. There are different types of prophets, right? There are prophets like Isaiah, who are sort of court prophets, right? They're speaking directly to kings. Elijah, right? Despite being sort of a different literary genre, is doing the same thing. Amos is like, I'm just a dude who heard a voice. He's a seer. He's got a call of some sort, but he's not a professional, right? There were definitely pros and there are amateurs, and Amos is very clear that he's acting as an amateur. And yet the content of what he says is very standard prophetic stuff. When we open the book of Amos, mostly you start right away with oracles against other nations. What's the point of those now?
Right.
Or what was the point of them then even?
Standard stuff. And I think if we think about prophets, prophet was a job that people had, especially in royal courts and associated with temples, going back to the ancient Near East, the city of Mari. We get evidence of these prophets associated with temples, and we read about prophets associated with kings. There's this weird story in Samuel where Saul runs into the band of prophets coming down from the shrine. We read about all the prophets of Baal during the time of Jezebel. So there were these sort of institutional pros. But one of the things it seems like that the institutional pros did was sort of make the kings feel better about themselves by prophesying that their military, that whatever the king did was going to be successful. Yeah. So, in the book of Kings, the king of Israel is like, should I go out to fight against my enemies? And all the prophets are like, oh, yeah. But then, the king of Judah is there too, and he says, well, is there anybody else we can ask? And then, of course, there's Micaiah ben Imlah who says, well, actually, So Amos is clearly distancing himself from that. He's using this, so the genre of the oracles against the nations is this very standard trope that, would have made the Israelite audience feel good about itself, right? Like, for 3 transgressions of Damascus and for 4 I will not withhold punishment. Boom, Damascus, boom, Moab, boom, Edom. These are all the nations around Israel, right? But what it does is, Amos is marking his distance, the fact that he's not institutional, by also, the kicker is, right, when he gets to Israel, right? Israel also, for 3 transgressions of Israel and for 4, I will not withhold punishment. And so he's calling Israel to account by the same, standard or tool that he's used to condemn the other nations. So that's what would have been new. And so it's part of the rhetorical function of Amos is to sort of overturn the audience's expectations and say, oh yeah, you think you're so much better than those other nations. Well, actually, right?
And you're right. And it seems actually, most of these other nations are like, I don't know how to say this, like real nations. And Israel is like, meh. Which is to say, like when Amos is yelling at the other nations, it's like, it's mostly like geopolitical stuff, right? Like
military stuff.
Like you did this evil thing to this other people, right? You hurt these guys. You attacked and you weren't nice. And then you can't say that about Israel because what's Israel ever done, right? Israel isn't some international power, even to the extent that I guess like Edom and Moab are at this time and place. Right. So when it gets to Israel, he's got to say something kind of different. And this is where we enter into the sort of the whole world of the social justice conversation.
Because this is Amos's message, and you can put it another way to say that he's using all that as a setup to get to his main point, which is Israel's transgression is its mistreatment of its population, of the marginalized.
Yeah, he's got a real economic disparity, economic inequality thing going on, right? The line that I hear in my head when I think about Amos is this, hear this word, you cows of Bashan who are around Mount Samaria, which I think is it's this wonderful phrase in part because it feels so weird, but like what a thing to call someone. But he's really on here about like rich people who are oppressing the poor, and of course the calling out of Samaria reminds us that he's really speaking very clearly to the northern kingdom, where there does seem to be, at least from his perspective, there really seems to be like a disparity between the well-off who sort of lie on their couches,
right,
and who offer their sacrifices, and then the needy who are struggling underneath.
Right. So scholars have pointed to how Amos's message to the north actually fits, it as it should, it fits the situation of the 8th century where Samaria, as the capital of the northern kingdom, was actually quite prosperous. And we know this from archaeology. We found these nice little ivory carvings and stuff. So this indictment about lying on beds of ivory, has some historical resonance to it. And in a time where riches, wine and oil and these commodities were being centralized or being sent to the capital to sort of bolster the riches of the court and the elite, while the more subsistence level farmers were not having the resources that they need. But I wanted to get back to your observation about sacrifice, right? That these elites in Samaria were going about their business, they were offering sacrifices, they were doing what they felt God expected of them. That doesn't come out so well in Amos, does it?
Yeah. It's probably worth, because this is a notion that comes up repeatedly in the Book of the 12 and throughout the prophetic corpus, but this, the condemnation of the cult or of sacrifices, which we hear things like, you're offering sacrifices. I don't need your sacrifices. Comes up here and Hosea and Micah, a bunch of other places, especially here in these earlier 8th century prophets. It's often taken as, truly saying like, I don't want sacrifices. What are you guys doing with this ridiculous way of worshiping? Which I think we recognize, you and I at least, as anachronistic Christian, post-sacrifice, sort of conceptually post-Judaism sort of like a way of thinking, like, oh, that's this old style that, God is rejecting. I mean, it's great stuff if you're like Luther,
Right, right.
But of course, in ancient Israel, that's not the message. Isn't don't sacrifice. The message is sacrificing as if it's going to cover up the sort of social ills or social abuses that you're committing. That doesn't work. So there's this running theme of that's like against rote faith or religion. I don't know how, like neither of those words really works for the ancient
Well, and again,
world.
reversal of expectations, that the audience feels like it knows. Like, we do this stuff, we do our sacrifices, we perform the cult, we do what God wants, and Amos is again like, this is not all of it. That's all fine. However, without justice, right, it's nothing. You know, in these famous words of chapter 5, let justice roll down like water, right?
Yeah. And then, right, there's this, again in chapter 5 here, the alas for you who desire the day of the Lord. We talked a little bit about it. Like, the day of the Lord is this really ambiguous, ambivalent kind of moment. It's like, there are people who are like, please let that come. This is an idea that changes radically over time. What is the day of the Lord in the 8th century?
Right.
Molly, tell me.
Well, I mean, I do think you can connect it back again to the oracles against the nations at the beginning, because the people who are waiting for the day of the Lord, the Israelites who are saying, oh yeah, day of the Lord, I'm ready, it's going to be awesome, are probably thinking that that's the time when Yahweh, as the patron God of Israel, is going to sort of win it all for Israel and sort of enact this victory over Israel's enemies. And instead, God's saying, no, you know, it is darkness and not light. The day of the Lord is not what you think it is.
Right.
And so again,
it's like an early sort of eschatology.
Right.
That is, but it's very much in this of this world, right? Like, this is you get this again. You get it in Isaiah also, right? This notion that like, when this day comes, all the other nations are going to fall, or their power is going to be broken, and maybe Israel is going to be. So it's a wonderful sort of thing to say. On the one hand, it elevates Israel to the level of these other nations, right? Oh, you could be powerful too, but also you're responsible.
Right?
Yeah, exactly.